So part two of what it's like to be a PC gamer for the past 10 years. So yeah, moving out of 2011, I started putting together a build, and in early 2012, it was all coming together. I decided on an i5-3570K. At the time, I actually just used the box cooler because I knew nothing about overclocking. I actually got it used, but it was like from a scientific lab supposedly on eBay, so they used it for 2 weeks, and I got it for like 200 bucks. Honestly, I think only like a month after it came out. I got 8 gigabytes of DDR3 at 1600 megahertz. I got a 1 terabyte hard drive. SSDs were wildly expensive in 2012, so that just wasn't an option for me at the time. And then I got a 650 watt power supply. And then came the graphics card, right? And like I said at the end of my last video, my question I kept asking on the Newegg building help center they had, which was kind of a cool, it was really just advertising products they only sold on Newegg, which became annoying to me eventually because you could sometimes find cheaper prices on Amazon. But the question I kept saying is, I want to play Battlefield 3 moving from console. And I want to play, I really tempered expectations. I was just used to such horrible performance on laptops. I thought asking for a whole lot would be crazy, which my friends, when I was helping them build their own desktops a few years ago, which is when most of my friends started building them after I had, they kept having these expectations of like, if I could just get 1080p 60 frames a second, that would be amazing. If my games could load in under a minute. And it's like, and I had to tell them like, look, if you spend $1,000, which you're telling me your budget is, you can game in 4K, 30 frames a second, no problem. You can, and if you turn down a few settings, 60 frames. No, 1080p 60 isn't an issue, and this is the weird thing when you first build a gaming desktop, is your expectations are just like, I just want it to work, basically. And you have no idea how easy this is going to be, and yet you don't know what to look for. And there usually are stupid things I found, especially the 2012 era of PC gaming, like right when you were getting out of the 40 nanometer cards. That just was absolutely idiotic. And so I'll start talking about that, what card I went with. And it ended up being a 560 Ti that I got used on eBay, but that became quite a saga. All right, so let's go to their page. Okay, so this is something that I want to make one of the center focuses of this video, of what I've learned, right, since building my first gaming PC in 2012. So I go on the Newegg help page, right, and I'm asking what cards this or that, and most of the time people are just recommending 560s, and I found this thing called a 560 SE, which is only like 5% weaker than a 560, and I could get it for like 150 new. And I was really excited about this because everyone was sure this would run 900p Battlefield 3. I was so excited about that. But then I went on eBay and noticed 560 Ti's going for 180 used, and I was like, oh man, if I could stretch my budget $30, it looks like I could get another 30-40% performance. I was really excited about eventually playing Metro 2033 because the game just looked awesome to me. And so that's what I went with. And it's like, why didn't you look at any of the AMD options? Shit, I mean, looking back on it, I probably could have gotten a 5870 for, maybe even a 5872 gigabyte for like the same price, and it probably would have been used for a long time. I don't know, but here's really why. So you Google a graphics card or something, and 560 Ti comes up, or someone suggests it to you. You put in 560 Ti on Google, and this pops up. Look how well organized NVIDIA's website is, right? Let's see here. Oh, look at that. An improved architecture, play Hawks 2 and Bad Company 2, performance. And look at this graph. This is something that AMD needs to get through their goddamn heads too, by the way, even to this day. Look how well organized this is. I can look at this and see how my cards stacks up to the previous cards. Now, actually, now that I think about it, back then, remember, none of these cards were here, but it would show like a 560 Ti, and then like a 460 or something, and I could say, oh my god, look at that. And then you would see like the 590 with this gigantic bar that just like skyrocketed up to here. And I'd go, wow, what's a 590? And I just kept learning about all these cool NVIDIA graphics cards. And the truth is, I had no idea AMD graphics cards existed. Like, of course I did, but I really didn't, right? Because I knew nothing about them. Their naming scheme was odd. inconsistent. I mean, they went from 870 to 950, and their website was horrible. Let's go to the 6950 website here. Okay, this is so bland and boring. I mean, let me see. Is it gonna let me scroll down? I mean, look at this. There's nothing on here. I go to specs. It tells you the specs, but does it? I mean, there's no advertising. It doesn't tell you how it compares to other things. It is the most bland thing. It's like is it any better than like those capture cards you see, those like a knockoff, for instance, like a knockoff sound card during the Windows Vista era that you dig up in a box at your house and you're like, does this still work? What drivers do I need to download? Their website would look almost as barren as this. Like, yes, we make this super audio card, and here's the drivers. And that's it. That's all that's on here. There's nothing about the card. I mean, again, go back to this. Look how awesome it is. It's linking to reviews, product images. You back then they showed people just uploading pictures of it in their PC. It was so cool. And that's just something you don't see on AMD's website. And I just do not know why, right? And to this day. So that's why I chose it. And I used it, and it was great. I remember booting up Crysis, and it ran a hell of a lot better than before. And I had Far Cry 3, and I was maxing it out. Or I don't think I had Far Cry 3 at the time. I think I was like, no, it was Crysis, and it was just absolutely amazing. And this is also when I started to learn of this weird bias in forums and tech websites for NVIDIA, though. And I noticed this halfway through 2012. And it's because a lot of the AMD cards at the time, like they were 6870 2 gigabytes that were the same price as a 560 Ti 1 gigabyte. And for like another 50, like I think at the time a new 560 Ti was about 250, and if you paid 300 though, you could get a 6950 2 gigabyte. But if you went on a forum, you'd see stuff like this here. Is 1 gigabyte enough? You really can't do any better than 1 gigabyte. The performance difference at 1080p even is minimal. And like you just keep seeing this here. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I'm running it at 1080p. That's fine. I don't mind turning down some settings. And this is a thing I've never seen. Well, I guess you do see it with AMD people, but like a thing that I just constantly saw back then, at least with Fermi cards, is don't worry, 1 gigabyte, 1.25 gigabytes, it's more than enough. You don't need an AMD card. It's like they thought a negative could be a positive, and I don't know where that came from. And over time, my brother also got one. Some of my friends from high school started building PCs, and we were all just getting, GTX 460s, 560s, and 560 Ti's. And we were happy for a while. But then I started really getting into overclocking. Like I download MSI Afterburner. I would, what do I, I wanted to get to 1 gigahertz on the Fermi card. And I started looking up stuff on my motherboard because I was like, I had a micro ATX motherboard. It had room. And I said to myself, could I fit 2 of these cards in here? I see SLI is a thing. And it looked like you could fit them. But then I learned that my motherboard didn't support SLI, but it did support Crossfire, which is a thing. There are motherboard vendors where they need to basically pay to have NVIDIA support SLI on their motherboard. And so for some reason, I just got it in my head to get 2 cards. And so I sold my 560 Ti to my brother, and I bought a 6950. And the difference was night and day. I got it for, I basically paid $20 to upgrade from a 560 Ti to a 6950. And there was easily a 20% performance boost at least. And then there were games like Metro that didn't have to have their textures turned down. Or, in fact, this is a big deal for me, Assassin's Creed 3 came out. My brother was getting immense stuttering on his 560 Ti. And it's like, well, how could that be a thing? Everyone here is telling you that 1 gigabyte is more than enough. And yet a game came out months after building my PC that was destroying my brother's performance. And he had to turn down the resolution and settings, which was mostly okay because Assassin's Creed was hard enough to run that he had to turn down the resolution probably if he wanted 60 FPS anyways. But Still, it would have been nice to maybe run it at 40 frames a second with 1 GB, and he still would get stuttering. And then Max Payne 3 came out, one of my favorite games of the year. Absolutely amazing game. And again, I could take my 6950 and run it on ultra settings, full textures, and it looked gorgeous. And you could tell the difference between the textures in 1080p. And my brother had to turn his settings down to like medium or low, and I was running ultra. And these were cards that were priced almost the same. And so this is when I started really going, what's going on here? Maybe I should be looking at AMD cards every time. You know, and I got Crossfire, and it scaled immensely. Like, and this is something that really started to open my eyes. So I kept gaming with it, the 6950 Crossfire, and then all of a sudden, I just wanted more. And I saw someone on my sales board at my college, and they were selling a 7970 for like $400. And I said, "Hey, would you take two 6950s and $40?" And he said he would. And so I traded it. And the performance I got was absolutely astounding. I mean, I don't know how else to put this, right? At the time, this was a card that you could run, and I got it for like $400 in 2012, which, if you think about it, was a killer deal. It was like $600 when it launched that year. And I was maxing out everything, and the overclocking was absolutely absurd. The overclocking of the 7970, I'll pull up my old chart here. You know, like stock clocks, 950, 1425 megahertz here. I recorded everything. I even recorded power usage. And I even had fun seeing how little energy I could make it use. And I got it down to 125 watts while still beating stock performance by about, what was it? Oh, yeah, 3%. And that's by underclocking the core, undervolting immensely, and then overclocking the memory still. I got a 3% boost over stock performance and was using 125 watts. This was blowing my mind. And what I ended up mostly gaming at was here. And this is where I want to really show you how big of a deal the 7970 was. So I got mine to 1215 core. 1830 megahertz. As long as I kept it below 81 degrees, it wouldn't crash. And the fans, it was a dual fan card. Frankly, I could run it at 100% fan, and it wouldn't, sound didn't bother me at all. And it was using, let's see, 260 watts, and I was getting a 31% boost. Some games, like Metro, I got a 35% boost over stock. And, you know, we're talking about 86 frames per second in BioShock Infinite on Ultra. Like, this is absolutely absurd performance here. And this is Metro on Ultra, which if you turn off DOF, you'll get to like 90 frames a second. You know, so think about that. The 7970 was the most powerful graphics card of its time. So imagine taking this and adding 30% more performance. That's something gamers don't know what it's like anymore. We're used to 20% performance increases, not 50% every year. Well, now it's 20% every year and a half, and it used to be 50% performance increase per year. And then also, some of those cards would overclock immensely well. I mean, the last good overclocking series is probably Maxwell. And so I just really want to emphasize how amazing that felt to have a card that powerful that overclocked so well. And so then I really started to get into arguments with people. Like, I didn't understand why anyone was buying the 680. You know, the 670 was a good card, but why was anyone buying into these NVIDIA cards? It just didn't make any sense to me. And this was before this happened. AMD released their Never Settle bundle of drivers, and it came with games. And then they increased performance 20% again. I mean, this was absolutely ridiculous. I mean, we started to see, like, these cards that were getting 20% performance increases. Yeah, see, look at that, 50 to 60. A 20% performance increase. And it was already tying or beating the 680. And you had the 7950 catching up to the 680 in games. And yet people kept buying Kepler cards. And this absolutely blew my mind. This is when I really got into, you know, the weird arguments online with which card to get. Like, I just couldn't figure out why people were getting these cards and why they were ignoring these things like PhysX being a complete joke, like just making it look like popcorn popping up everywhere around you. They were ignoring the fact that the GTX 660 had only 1.5 gigabytes of RAM and half a gigabyte of potato memory. Yeah, that's right, people. The 970 wasn't the first card to do it. It just seemed like no one cared because it was a mid-range card. And frankly, back then, almost no cards used more than 1.5 gigabytes of RAM. So that's what happened to me in 2012. Just I go from, and I got a 500 gigabyte SSD, I believe, within a year too. So it was this weird period of switching between different graphics cards, figuring out how much performance I actually wanted, and learning that you can't blame people for buying NVIDIA first because AMD's website is absolutely ridiculous. Now, what about processors? I basically ignored them, both of these videos. I'll touch on them a little bit. You know, this is where we're dealing with the 3770K coming out and just wiping the floor with everything. It was an absolute joke. I mean, you've got games. I mean, look at this. This is absolutely ridiculous here. You got the 2500K, the best AMD processor. I don't. There's not much to say here, you know, except that you could recommend AMD for budget builds, but there were times to recommend it, and that was really the Phenom series. I know my little brother built a Phenom build, and he got this quad-core Phenom CPU that he overclocked to 4 gigahertz. You know, remember, this is stock performance. He overclocked this by like 20%, and he got, you know, above an i3 for $100 or less than $100. And the motherboards were way cheaper than Intel. So this was a weird time period where Intel was clearly in the lead, but Phenoms were still these awesome budget cards. I mean, in fact, they would even beat the i7 920 a lot of the time. And their power consumption really wasn't that bad compared to, like, so here's the 920, right? The Phenom 2s were good, but Sandy Bridge made them all basically relegated to fighting off the i3s while using more energy. There's not much more to add to the CPUs there. You know, so closing thoughts here on the second video. You know, I went from a Faramee card just because it was the only thing I could afford, and it was the only thing I knew that existed that I thought I could afford, right? It's that thing I keep hearing, like the Good Old Gamer or Adored TV say, where they go, it's not about people looking at price performance. It's just about people going, I have this budget. What's NVIDIA's card at this price point? Because I did that. That was my first build. You know, and then basically just stumbling into an AMD cards, going to a 6950, which I was told was only supposed to be about the same thing, maybe a little stronger, and it felt decently stronger, especially because of the extra RAM. And it just seemed quieter too. And then also just being in an era of not really thinking about CPUs much. If you were a budget gamer, I told you to get a Phenom x4 Black Edition, or maybe those triple core Athlons. Those are really cool. You can get them for like $50, and it would certainly run every game, because most games use 2 cores, and you had a third one for backup operations. And then just telling everyone to get Ivy Bridge because it had PCI 3.0, SATA 3.0, and there was just no point in anything else. You know, the last thing I want to really touch on for this video, though, is the reliability of Faramee, which was absolutely atrocious. And I do want to emphasize this because I'm not exaggerating. My 560 Ti broke, and then I got it replaced from EVGA, and then I got a 6950. And then my brother's broke, which was my fixed one, and then he got that one fixed, and then he got a second one for SLI. SLI just straight up didn't work. We couldn't fix it. If you go back in history, it turns out there was a bug. We found this out a year later after we'd already gotten rid of them. That AMD 970, AM3 Plus 970 chipsets, some of them couldn't run SLI without flickering, and so that was just one of those things where we first learned multi-GPU, at least on NVIDIA cards, for us just wasn't worth it. And so I brought it to college for my little brother because he was still in high school, and there was a market there for PC cards. And I sold both of them off, and one of them broke. So that guy's also broke. This is the third 560 Ti that broke. And then I helped him return it. I said, hey, man, give it to me. I'll get it fixed for you because I have all the RMA information you need, like an invoice for when you bought it, right? And so then I got it fixed, gave it to him again, and he said it broke again, and he just threw it away, and he didn't blame me. He's like, hey, man, you helped me more than anyone who ever sold on Craigslist has ever helped me. It's not your fault, but that card sucks. And I said, I know it sucks. And the other one, I don't. And then the second one did not break, I guess, somehow. I actually think I just sold that a few months ago, finally, for $20. But and then I had friends who got a 460. His broke. He got it repaired. It broke again. I had a friend who got, all of these Fermi cards, especially EVGA ones, broke. And this is one thing I constantly tell people, and I'm gonna get so much hate here for saying this. EVGA cards are horribly unreliable, and I don't know what's going on with that, and especially back in the Fermi era. And seeing people say that NVIDIA was higher quality for me was, again, just so jarring. And it could have been luck, and I'm not saying it couldn't have been, but to just have like basically every Fermi card I come across that's used heavily break, then every AMD card we get, like maybe 1 out of 10 break. It was so weird to me to see this weird perception of NVIDIA high-end cards back then. I don't know. So those are my final thoughts. Going into the end of 2012, AMD had actually managed to hold the performance crown somehow once again, even though their CPU business was a complete wreck and they didn't have any R&D money. And this really led into what started to happen when there were rumblings of a GTX Titan. And that will be my next video. Thank you, everybody. Please like and subscribe and share this video as much as you can. Support me if you want to. Have a good evening.